They thought they could trap me with a dinner invitation. What they didn't expect was the lawyer I brought with me. The room went still, like the air had been sucked out of it. His parents stared at me from across the long, polished dining table. Then, without a hint of hesitation, they slid a thick contract across the surface toward me. "Sign this," his father said coldly. "All your assets," his mother added, her voice syrupy sweet, "will now belong to the family." I blinked, stunned, and looked at my husband, Ethan. He smirked like this was all just a casual dinner conversation. "It's just a formality, babe," he said like it was nothing, like it was normal. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, calm, cool, calculated. "Well then," I said smoothly, "you're going to love what's in my safety deposit box." Everything changed in an instant. Their expressions morphed. Ethan's smirk faltered. His mother's grip tightened around her wine glass. His father's face turned to stone. And just as the silence threatened to swallow the room, the door creaked open behind me. "Ma'am," the butler said, stepping in with perfect timing, "your lawyer is here." 6 years earlier, when it all began, I met Ethan 6 years ago on a crisp fall evening in Boston. I was 29, sharp, independent, and laser-focused on building the life I'd always dreamed of. Real estate was my world. I flipped homes, made smart investments, and carved out a secure, steady future for myself. Nothing flashy, but solid. Mine. Then Ethan appeared. He was charm-wrapped in a designer suit. Confident, smooth, magnetic. He carried himself like a man who'd never known struggle. The kind of guy who wore custom shoes without ever looking at the price tag. Everything about him screamed old money. His watch, his words, even the way he sipped his espresso. At first, I was cautious. I wasn't some naive girl dazzled by wealth. I worked with wealthy people every day. But there was something about his energy, his presence, it pulled me in. He never talked much about finances, but he always had the best of everything. Newest phone, luxury car, dinners at places where the bill could pay a month's rent. His parents, Gerald and Margaret, were the same icy elegance, the kind of people who made you feel like you should thank them just for being in their house. Their mansion was a museum of ego, oil paintings of stern ancestors, velvet furniture you weren't supposed to sit on, and a constant reminder that they were a legacy. Still, there were cracks in the facade. Little comments from Margaret like, "A woman like you must be thrilled to have this kind of stability," or "You're so lucky to be joining our family." I should have asked them then. Why did they assume I needed saving? There were red flags with Ethan too. He borrowed money here and there, always small amounts, and always forgot to pay it back. Once, he asked me to co-sign a mortgage on a property he wanted, said it would be easier for tax reasons. I said no. I shut it down. But still, I stayed. I told myself love was compromise, that none of this really mattered. Until the night they tried to take everything. The dinner that changed everything. Ethan and I had been married for 2 years when the invitation came. Dinner at his parents' estate wasn't unusual. Gerald and Margaret loved their grand, theatrical family gatherings, tables dripping in crystal and silverware, wine older than most of their guests, and conversations about legacy as if it were sacred scripture. But that night, something felt different. From the moment we arrived, I could feel it in the air, thick, tense like a storm waiting to break. Ethan seemed unusually upbeat, practically glowing. Margaret's smile was stretched too wide, too polished. Gerald, stoic as ever, wore a look of quiet satisfaction, the kind that said, "Everything is going according to plan." Halfway through the meal, Gerald cleared his throat. The room went quiet. Without a word, he reached beneath the table and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it in front of me like it was a gift wrapped in gold. "We've been thinking about the future," Margaret said, her voice soft and sugary. "About what's best for the family." I glanced at Ethan. He was watching me, close, careful, like he already knew what was inside. Like he was waiting. "We need to ensure stability," Gerald added, nudging a pen toward me. "This agreement allows us to combine our resources. A united front. One powerful financial entity." I opened the first page, and my stomach dropped. They wanted it all. My savings, My investments, my real estate portfolio, even my personal checking account. Everything would be signed over into a family trust, controlled by them. I felt the blood drain from my face. It's just a formality, babe, Ethan said smoothly, as if asking me to pass the salt. You trust me, don't you? That was the moment something inside me shifted. I leaned back in my chair. My hands were steady, but my mind was racing. I looked around the table at these people, smiling, waiting, certain I would fold. Then I smiled. Then you're going to love what's in my safety deposit box. When the lawyer walked in, the silence that followed my words wasn't just awkward. It was electric. Ethan's confident smile faltered. Margaret's fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass until her knuckles went white. Gerald didn't move a muscle, but his jaw clenched ever so slightly. They had expected me to be flattered, maybe even grateful. Instead, I was playing an entirely different game. What's in the box? Ethan asked, his voice strained, like he was trying to keep it steady. Oh, just some paperwork, I said casually, lifting my wine glass to my lips. Documents. A few little things I put together before we got married. You know, for protection. The pause that followed was long and heavy. Then, as if the universe had cued it perfectly, the butler stepped back into the room. Ma'am, he said politely, your attorney has arrived. I wish I had a camera to capture their faces. Ethan went pale. Margaret looked like she just swallowed broken glass. Gerald simply stared at me, eyes narrow, the contract still clenched in his hand like it might suddenly vanish. A moment later, Teresa stepped into the dining room. My lawyer, my ace. She wore a dark suit and the kind of calm confidence that made people sit up straighter. She didn't hesitate, just walked right up to the table and set her briefcase down with a quiet thud. Good evening, she said, her voice smooth but firm. I understand there's a contract someone would like my client to sign. Margaret was the first to recover. Her voice snapped like a whip. This is a private family matter, she said, eyes flashing. We don't need lawyers meddling. Teresa didn't even glance at her. Instead, she picked up the contract, flipped through the pages, and skimmed it like she'd read 100 of them before breakfast. Then she laughed, short, sharp, and cold. Wow, she said, shaking her head. This isn't just overreaching. This is outright financial manipulation. Ethan shifted in his chair. It's not like that, he muttered. Actually, Teresa replied, turning to face him, it's exactly like that. She pointed to the fine print. If she signed this, you'd have full control over her accounts, her properties, her finances. And she'd be legally powerless to stop you. You could sell her assets, drain her bank accounts, take everything, and she wouldn't even be able to fight back. Margaret's face flushed a deep red. This is about trust, she snapped. You're twisting everything. Right, Teresa said dryly, flipping to another page. That's why the contract clearly states that any withdrawal or sale requires family approval, but not hers. She looked at me. It's a good thing you brought me tonight. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair screeching across the hardwood. Why are you acting like this? He demanded, eyes locked on mine. I stared back, calm and steady. Why am I acting like this? I said quietly. You just tried to steal everything from me. Margaret's voice shifted into something sickly sweet. A performance. She placed a hand over her heart, like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding. We only wanted to protect you. I stood, my chair gliding back slowly. No, I said firmly. You wanted to control me. Ethan reached out, grabbing my wrist, not hard, but enough to make a point. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. Don't do this. You don't want to make enemies here. I yanked my arm free. You already did. The inheritance bait. The room had turned to ice. Margaret's polished mask was cracking. Ethan stood frozen, unsure whether to retreat or lash out again. Gerald? He sat in seething silence, his eyes dark and unreadable. Then Margaret tried a new tactic, her voice soft, pleading, like I was the one being unreasonable. Darling, we only wanted to protect you. This world, it's dangerous. Money disappears in an instant. We wanted to make sure you were safe. That we were all safe. Safe, right? Safe from what exactly? I asked, my voice quiet but pointed. Teresa folded her arms and stepped closer. If this was about protection, why does the trust give them full control over every cent, while my client is left without any access to her own assets? Gerald exhaled hard through his nose. The pressure was showing in his posture, his tone, his eyes. "This is unnecessary," he grumbled. "Let's move forward like adults." I almost laughed. "Like adults?" I echoed. "You mean like how adults try to steal from someone they call family?" The room pulsed with tension. They didn't expect resistance. They expected me to cave, to be overwhelmed, too shocked to think straight. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Then Margaret dropped her bomb. "I suppose," she said with a heavy, performative sigh, "this means you're not interested in the inheritance either." I snapped my eyes toward her. Inheritance? I caught the warning look Ethan shot her, a quick, desperate flicker of panic. But it was too late. The word was out there now, dangling in the air like bait. "Oh," Margaret continued, as if she hadn't just detonated a secret. "Did Ethan not tell you? His grandfather's estate, the one in Newport? That's the real wealth in this family." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Teresa glanced at me. She was thinking the same thing I was. This was never just about my money. Margaret leaned in slightly, her voice airy and nonchalant. "The estate is currently in probate, but soon we'll gain full control. Of course, with your attitude." She didn't finish her sentence. She didn't have to. She was dangling a golden carrot in front of me. Opinidita, hoping I'd trade my dignity for a promise. But all I saw was a pattern. This family didn't build wealth. They hunted it, manipulated their way into control, always scheming for the next takeover. And Ethan? He had known all along. About the inheritance. About the plan. He had lied again. I turned to him, eyes narrowed. "Were you ever going to tell me?" He ran a hand through his hair, tension pouring off of him. "I was going to bring it up later, okay," he muttered. "When the timing was better." "Better for who?" I asked. He didn't answer, because the truth was written all over his face. He never intended to tell me. The hidden truth beneath the surface. We left their mansion that night in complete silence. Not another word was spoken. No apologies. No denials. Just the quiet unraveling of a fantasy I never asked to be part of. As soon as we got in the car, Teresa let out a heavy sigh and rubbed her temples. The weight of it all hung between us like fog. "You realize what this means, right?" she said, her voice low and cautious. I stared out the window, the lights of the estate fading behind us. "Yeah," I murmured. "They weren't just after my money." "Exactly," Teresa said, tapping her fingers against her briefcase. "That inheritance, whatever's waiting for them in Rhode Island, they'll do anything to keep control of it." I nodded slowly, my thoughts racing, snapping together like puzzle pieces that had been scattered for years. The lavish lifestyle, the overconfidence, the way Ethan talked like money was no object, but somehow never paid for a damn thing himself. "What are the odds he's in debt?" I asked, my voice sharper now. Teresa looked over at me, serious. "You think he's hiding something?" "No," I said. "I know he is." And suddenly, everything made sense. The charm, the manipulation, the sudden push for me to hand over everything I'd built. This wasn't about joining forces. This was about saving himself at my expense. The next morning, I did something I should have done a long time ago. I hired a private investigator. I wanted it all. His finances, his credit, his business history, his past, every hidden corner of Ethan's world. And when the report came back a few days later, it was worse than I'd imagined. He was drowning. Multiple maxed-out credit cards, personal loans, even a small business loan he had taken out on my name without telling me. I saw red. He hadn't just lied. He had stolen from me, used me, and worst of all, he thought he could get away with it. That night, I waited for him in the kitchen, the documents spread out on the counter like a silent battlefield. We walked in. I didn't say a word at first. I let him see it, let him feel it. "How long have you been stealing from me?" I asked, my voice like ice. Ethan froze, blinked, tried to play dumb. "What are you talking about?" I shoved the papers toward him. "You took out a loan under my name. You hid your debt. You lied to my face, and then you wanted me to sign everything over to you so you could clean up your mess." He didn't deny it. Instead, he laughed. A hollow, bitter sound that sent a chill down my spine. You were always so damn careful, he muttered, shaking his head like I was the problem. I thought you'd understand, that you'd see the bigger picture. My chest tightened. So this was always the plan? I said quietly. He looked up at me, his face unreadable. Cold. You have no idea what you've just started. I stepped back, a sudden wave of clarity washing over me. Are you threatening me? He didn't answer, just stared at me, jaw tight, eyes dark. Then he grabbed his coat and walked out the door like he still had control of the story. But he didn't. Not anymore. Other women, other lies. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced, playing every memory on a loop, every excuse, every red flag I'd brushed aside. Ethan hadn't just lied. He hadn't just stolen. He had planned this. From the very beginning. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Teresa. You need to come to my office, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Now. I didn't ask questions. I just got in my car and drove. When I arrived, she was already waiting, a thick file sitting on her desk like a loaded weapon. You're not going to like this, she warned, sliding it toward me. I opened the folder, and my blood ran cold. There were photographs. 2 women, Lisa and Brielle, both younger than me, both heartbreakingly beautiful, and both carrying the same haunted look in their eyes. Teresa spoke gently, but the words still felt like a punch. Lisa was with Ethan 2 years ago. He promised to marry her, took out a loan in her name, cleaned out her savings, then vanished. I swallowed hard. And Brielle? Last year, Teresa said grimly. Same story. Except this time, he didn't bother to end things before starting something new. I stared at their faces, the rage bubbling under my skin. He was cheating, I said. While married to you, Teresa confirmed. Then she flipped to the next page and delivered the final blow. He's also engaged to Brielle. I blinked. What? Teresa nodded. He gave her a ring. They're planning a wedding. 6 weeks from now. I felt sick. So he's married to me, engaged to her, and scamming both of us. Pretty much. The room went quiet for a moment, the weight of it all hanging heavy in the air. Then it hit me. The inheritance. Ethan needed to be married on paper to access it. He wasn't just trying to steal my money. He was trying to replace me before I figured it out. I straightened in my chair. I need to talk to Brielle, face to face with his next victim. Teresa set it up. A quiet coffee shop in the city. Neutral ground. No drama. No scenes. I arrived early and waited at a corner table, hands wrapped around a warm mug I had no intention of drinking. My heart pounded like war drums. I didn't know what I'd say, only that Brielle needed to hear the truth before it was too late. And then she walked in. She looked radiant, glowing even, that kind of glow women have when they believe their life is about to begin. She spotted me, smiled politely, and approached with curiosity in her eyes. But that smile faded the second I said Ethan's name. Her expression dropped like glass shattering on concrete. How do you know him? She asked, her voice instantly guarded. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my purse and slowly pulled out my wedding ring. I set it on the table between us. She stared at it, not breathing. Then, with trembling hands, she opened her bag and pulled out her ring. She placed it beside mine. Identical. That's when the tears started. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet devastation. Her dream life unraveling right in front of her. She wiped her cheeks and whispered, He told me we were getting married. That once his inheritance cleared, we'd move to France. Start fresh. He said he needed to be married to access the estate. I felt my jaw clench. And he convinced you to hand over your savings, didn't he? She nodded. He said it was temporary, that he was consolidating assets, that once the estate came through, I'd never have to worry about money again. I reached across the table and gently placed my hand over hers. I believe him too, I said softly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just sat in the shared silence of 2 women scammed by the same man. Then I asked, Do you still have contact with him? She nodded again. He's supposed to take me to meet his family this weekend. I exhaled, slow and steady. Perfect. She looked up confused. We're going to crash that little reunion, I said with a smile. Together. Brielle blinked, then slowly nodded. I'm in, playing along while plotting everything. We didn't tell Ethan a thing. Brielle kept texting him, just like always, sweet emojis, heart-filled messages, playing the part of the clueless, adoring fiancé. She told him she couldn't wait to meet his parents. She gushed over their future, the wedding, the dream he'd sold her like a slick con man at a luxury auction. And he ate it up. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was building my arsenal. I hired a forensic accountant to dig through every corner of Ethan's financial world. I wanted it all. Every offshore account, every dollar moved under the table, every lie tied to his signature. And what we found wasn't a paper cut. It was a full-blown hemorrhage. Ethan wasn't just broke. He was buried. He had hidden money in offshore accounts. The debt I'd already uncovered barely scratched the surface. Credit cards, personal loans, shady partnerships, unpaid taxes. He was using women like ATMs, one after the other, bleeding them dry, then disappearing when the well ran out. Then we turned our attention to his family. And that's when things really got interesting. Remember the road, island estate? The grand inheritance? Turns out it wasn't theirs yet. Not officially. Probate court was still sorting through the mess, and the one condition for access was clear: a stable heir, married, with clean financials. Ethan was supposed to be that heir. They needed him married, on paper, to someone with assets. That someone had been me. But now, I held every card, every lie, every receipt, every weapon I needed to burn their little empire to the ground. And I wasn't going to do it alone. The night of the family dinner came faster than I expected. Everything was set. Ethan thought he was bringing his darling fiancée to meet his proud, wealthy family. A celebration of love, legacy, control. Instead, he was about to walk into a war zone. The dinner they never saw coming. The night air was cool as Brielle, and I stepped out of the car, shoulder to shoulder, perfectly poised. She wore the ring he gave her. I wore the smile of a woman who knew exactly what was coming. The estate loomed ahead, lit like a cathedral of power and lies. Inside, Ethan's parents were already seated at their grand table. Wine poured, silver polished, every detail curated to show just how important they believed they were. I walked in first. Margaret's face twisted in confusion the moment she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and sharp. I smiled, cool and composed. Wouldn't miss family night for the world. Before she could fire back, Ethan appeared behind me, arm in arm with Brielle. And then he froze. Color drained from his face as his eyes bounced between us, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Babe," he said to Brielle, his voice cracking under the weight of his panic. "Why is she here?" Brielle didn't answer. She simply crossed her arms. "You tell me." Silence. Real silence. The kind that makes people hold their breath. Margaret stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I won't have this drama at my table." "Oh, trust me," I said, stepping closer. "You're going to want to hear every word." Teresa stepped into the room like a shadow, with purpose. Calm, controlled, her briefcase in one hand, evidence in the other. "If I may," she said politely, "let's begin with fraud." She flipped open her folder. "And then, we'll move on to bigamy." The explosion was instant. Margaret gasped, hand flying to her chest like she'd been shot. Gerald slammed his glass down, wine splashing across the white linen. Brielle ripped the ring off her finger and threw it at Ethan, hitting him square in the chest. And Ethan? He just sat there, frozen, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost, and realizing it was the ghost of his own undoing. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The fallout begins. The room wasn't just tense, it was cracking apart at the seams. Ethan sat there, unmoving, his hands gripping the edge of the table, so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. Margaret looked like she wanted to scream, but couldn't find the air. Gerald just stared ahead, the weight of decades crashing into his shoulders all at once. "This is absurd," Margaret finally spat, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Fraud? Bigamy? Where are you even getting this nonsense?" Teresa didn't blink. She calmly slid a thick folder across the table. "It's all right here," she said. "Bank records, loan applications, forged signatures, And she tapped another document. Proof that Ethan took out a business loan under his wife's name without her consent. That alone is a felony. Ethan flinched, but Margaret leaned forward, snapping, "This is a family matter." "No," I said, my voice clear, calm, and cold. "It stopped being a family matter the moment you try to rob me blind. This is criminal, and now it's legal." And then Brielle spoke, voice sharp with betrayal. "What about the bigamy, Ethan?" she said, arms crossed. "Last I checked, I was engaged to a single man, not a married con artist." Ethan finally stood, his chair scraping across the floor. His eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal. "Brielle," he said gently, trying to find the voice he used to charm her. "I can explain." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'd love to hear it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Okay, yes, I was still married, but it wasn't what you think. Our marriage," he gestured at me without meeting my eyes, "it was over. We were just dragging things out." I scoffed. "Dragging things out? Ethan, you literally tried to con me into signing away my entire net worth last week. Doesn't sound over to me." Brielle's jaw tightened. "So what about the wedding? The future you promised? All those nights you told me I was your everything, was any of it real?" Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Guilt? Panic? Or just the realization that his lies were no longer working? "I meant it," he whispered. "I wanted us to have a future, Brielle. While still married?" she snapped. He didn't answer. Then Margaret, still reeling, turned her fury on me. "You set this up," she said, her voice venomous. "You're trying to ruin us." I actually laughed. "Ruin you?" I repeated. "No, Margaret. You ruined yourselves." I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it. Ethan hadn't spoken for a while, and that's when I knew he was about to snap. And I was ready for it. The mask comes off. The air in the room changed. Not just tense, charged. Ethan's silence stretched too long. His jaw was tight, his chest rising and falling faster now. Everyone could feel it, that quiet before something breaks. And then he snapped. "You think you've won," he muttered, voice low and dangerous. Eyes locked on me like I was the enemy he never saw coming. Everyone turned to look at him. "You act like you're the victim here," he growled. "But let's be honest. This was always about power for you. You liked having everything in your name. You liked holding it over me, making me come to you for money." I raised an eyebrow, unfazed. That's an interesting way to describe protecting myself from a liar who hides debt and forges documents. His nostrils flared. "You never trusted me," he barked. "You never gave me the chance. I was your husband. I was supposed to be your partner." He slammed his fist on the table hard. The glasses rattled. Margaret flinched. Brielle took a step back. Gerald, for the first time that night, raised his voice. "Sit down." It wasn't loud, but the weight in his tone dropped like an anchor. Ethan hesitated, breathing heavily. Then, slowly, he sank back into his seat, glaring at me like a man who realized he had nothing left to fight with. Teresa cleared her throat, cutting through the thick tension like a blade. "Since emotions are running high," she said crisply, flipping through her files, "let's simplify this." She held up a document. "First, Brielle has already filed a formal complaint regarding the money Ethan took from her. That's one count of financial fraud." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Second," she continued, "we've submitted evidence to law enforcement regarding the forged loan documents in my client's name. That's identity theft. Another felony." Margaret gasped. "You went to the police?" she said, eyes wide. "Of course I did," I said, staring at Ethan. "Did you really think I'd just let you walk away after everything you've done?" His fists curled. "Third," Teresa said, her voice calm but cold, "we looked into the Rhode Island estate. It appears the family's assets are frozen." Gerald's head shot up. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Teresa gave a small, satisfied smile. "Oh, you didn't know? The probate court has flagged multiple irregularities, including undisclosed debts that go back years. Turns out the real reason you needed my client's money in that trust was because you needed it to stay afloat." The air shifted like a storm had just passed through the room. Margaret stood up, panic creeping into her voice. "That's a lie." But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. And neither did Gerald. They knew. They were finished. The turning point. They start to eat their own. Margaret's voice cracked as she tried to deny it again, but the panic in her eyes betrayed her. This can't be happening, she whispered, her hands trembling. Our estate, our name, it's everything we've built. Teresa didn't blink. Correction, it's everything you pretended to build. Gerald's expression hardened, a vein pulsing at his temple. He looked years older in that moment, as though all the weight of every buried lie had finally caught up to him. Then, like a trigger had been pulled, Margaret turned on Ethan. You idiot, she hissed, pointing a manicured finger at her son. You had one job. Keep her happy. Keep her on your side. Secure the trust. And now look at us. We're ruined. Ethan recoiled. Don't pin this on me, he snapped. This was your idea. You wanted the trust. You coached me through every word. You said she'd never see it coming. And you were supposed to execute it, she screamed, her voice shrill and venomous. Brielle stepped back, watching them like someone witnessing a shipwreck in real time. Gerald rubbed his temples, muttering something under his breath before slamming his fist on the table. Enough, but it wasn't enough. It was too late. The illusion was shattered, the lies exposed. And now, they were too busy tearing each other apart to realize they were already buried beneath the rubble. Then Brielle turned to me, her voice shaking but certain. I want him arrested. I looked at her, calm, firm. Don't worry, I said. It's already in motion. Ethan's head snapped toward me. You wouldn't. I met his stare dead on. No fear, no hesitation. Watch me, and right on cue, the distant sound of sirens pierced the night. Margaret went still. Gerald stood up in disbelief. Ethan? He bolted toward the door, but the moment he swung it open, 2 officers were already there. Ethan Wallace, one of them said, stepping forward. You're under arrest for identity theft, fraud, and bigamy. You have the right to remain silent. I stood still, watching as they cuffed him, read him his rights, and let him out the door. Margaret covered her mouth. Gerald sat down heavily, as if the floor beneath him had finally given way. And me? I didn't blink. Because I wasn't just surviving this. I was ending it. Ashes and aftermath. The door shut behind the officers, and just like that, he was gone. Ethan, the liar. The thief. The man I once thought I'd spend forever with. Arrested. Charged. Finished. Silence settled over the room, but it wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the aftermath of a war. Margaret sat stunned, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. Gerald, for once, looked like a man without power, just an aging father watching the legacy he built on fraud crumble around him. No one said a word as Teresa calmly packed up her files and slid them into her briefcase. Brielle and I stood together, side by side, 2 women who had once been strangers, now forever connected by betrayal, survival, and victory. Margaret finally broke the silence. You'll regret this, she said, barely more than a whisper. I turned to her slowly. Not angry, just done. No, I said, the only thing I regret is ever trusting a single one of you. Then I walked out. Brielle followed. We didn't look back. 1 week later, the Rhode Island estate, officially frozen. The trust Ethan tried to trick me into signing, dissolved thanks to Teresa and every bulletproof clause we had in place. Their properties began slipping into foreclosure one by one. Debt collectors, lawsuits, investigations. Turns out, when your empire is built on sand and secrets, it doesn't take much to bring it down. As for Ethan, he was being held without bail. The charges stacked higher by the day. Fraud, identity theft, bigamy, financial abuse. His past finally catching up to him, in courtrooms and headlines alike. And Brielle? She moved out of state, started over. She sent me a photo last week, standing in front of a cozy bookstore she opened, smiling for real this time. I couldn't help but smile too. As for me, I took some time. I went away for a while, rented a cabin near the mountains, left my phone off, and let the quiet heal me. But when I came back stronger. I reinvested. Took everything I learned from the wreckage and built again, this time smarter, harder, and without a single name on my assets but my own. Final thought. Sometimes, revenge isn't about getting even. It's about getting free. People say revenge doesn't fix anything. Maybe that's true, but sometimes it's not about revenge. It's about truth. It's about pulling back the curtain and making sure the people who tried to ruin you see the ashes of their plans before they're buried beneath them. And sometimes that is justice, because I didn't just get my money back. I got myself back, and that was worth everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.